Hello, good evening. Today our topic about Thomas Jefferson, and get ready on your bed with informatic history about that all persons who played role for USA. Kindly subscribe my channel for more videos about history. Thomas Jefferson, April 13th, OS April 2nd, 1743. July 4th, 1826, was an American founding father and the third President of the United States from 1801 to 1809. He was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson was the nation's first U.S. Secretary of State under George Washington, and then the nation's second Vice President under John Adams. Jefferson was a leading proponent of democracy, republicanism, and natural rights, and he produced formative documents and decisions at the state, national, and international levels. Jefferson was born into the colony of Virginia's planter class, dependent on slave labor. During the American Revolution, Jefferson represented Virginia in the Second Continental Congress, which unanimously adopted the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson's advocacy for individual rights, including freedom of thought, speech, and religion, helped shape the ideological foundations of the Revolution and inspired the 13 colonies in their revolutionary fight for independence, which culminated in the establishment of the United States as a free and sovereign nation. Jefferson served as the second governor of revolutionary Virginia from 1779 to 1781. In 1785, Congress appointed Jefferson U.S. Minister to France, where he served from 1785 to 1789. President Washington then appointed Jefferson the nation's first Secretary of State, where he served from 1790 to 1793. In 1792, Jefferson and political ally James Madison organized the Democratic-Republican Party to oppose the Federalist Party during the formation of the nation's first party system. Jefferson and Federalist John Adams became both personal friends and political rivals. In the 1796 U.S. presidential election between the two, Jefferson came in second, which made him Adams' vice president under the electoral laws of the time. 4 years later, in the 1800 presidential election, Jefferson again challenged Adams and won the presidency. In 1804, Jefferson was re-elected overwhelmingly to a second term. Jefferson's presidency assertively defended the nation's shipping and trade interests against Barbary pirates and aggressive British trade policies, promoted a Western expansionist policy with the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the nation's geographic size and reduced military forces and expenditures following successful negotiations with France. In his second presidential term, Jefferson was beset by difficulties at home, including the trial of his former vice president, Aaron Burr. In 1807, Jefferson implemented the Embargo Act to defend the nation's industries from British threats to U.S. shipping, limit foreign trade, and stimulate the birth of the American manufacturing. Jefferson is ranked among the upper tier of U.S. presidents by both scholars and in public opinion. Presidential scholars and historians have praised Jefferson's advocacy of religious freedom and tolerance, his peaceful acquisition of the Louisiana Territory from France, and his leadership in supporting the Lewis and Clark expedition. They acknowledge his lifelong ownership of large numbers of slaves, but offer varying interpretations of his views on and relationship with slavery. Early life and education. Jefferson was born on April 13, 1743. April 2, 1743. Old Style, Julian calendar, at the family's Shadwell plantation in the colony of Virginia, then one of the 13 colonies of British America. He was the third of 10 children. His father, Peter Jefferson, was a planter and surveyor. His mother was Jane Randolph. Peter Jefferson moved his family to Tuckahoe Plantation in 1745 following the death of William Randolph III, the plantation's owner and Jefferson's friend, who in his will had named Peter guardian of Randolph's children. The Jeffersons returned to Shadwell before October 1753. Jefferson began his education, together with the Randolph children, at Tuckahoe under tutors. Thomas, Father Peter, who was self-taught and regretted not having a formal education, entered Thomas into an English school at age 5. In 1752, at age 9, he attended a local school run by a Presbyterian minister, and also began studying the natural world, which he grew to love. He studied Latin, Greek, and French, and began learning to ride horses. Thomas read books from his father's modest library. He was taught from 1758 to 1760 by the Reverend James Morey near Gordonsville, Virginia, where he studied history, science, and the classics while boarding with Morey's family. Jefferson came to know various American Indians, including Cherokee chief Ostanaco, who often stopped at Shadwell to visit on their way to Williamsburg to trade. In Williamsburg, the young Jefferson met and came to admire Patrick Henry. Thomas's father died in 1757, and his estate was divided between his sons, Thomas and Randolph. John Harvey Sr. became 14-year-old Thomas' guardian in 1761, at the age of 18. Jefferson entered the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, where he studied mathematics and philosophy with William Small. Under Small's tutelage, Jefferson encountered the ideas of British empiricists, including John Locke, Francis Bacon, and Isaac Newton. Small also introduced Jefferson to George Wythe and Francis Fauquier. Small, Wythe, and Fauquier recognized Jefferson as a man of exceptional ability and included him in their inner circle, where he became a regular member of their Friday dinner parties. Jefferson later wrote that, while there, he heard more common good sense, more rational and philosophical conversations than in all the rest of my life. During his first year in college, Jefferson spent considerable time attending parties and dancing, and was not very frugal with his expenditures. In his second year, regretting that he had squandered away time and money in his first year, he committed to studying 15 hours a day. While at William and Mary, Jefferson became a member of the Flat Hat Club, the nation's oldest secret society, a small group whose members included St. George Tucker, Edmund Randolph, and James Innes. Jefferson concluded his formal studies in April 1762. He read the law under Wythe's tutelage while working as a law clerk in his office. Jefferson was well read in a broad variety of subjects, including law, philosophy, history, natural law, natural religion, ethics, and several areas of science, including agriculture. Jefferson kept 2 commonplace books. From about age 15 to 30, he compiled a book of sayings and quotations, published in the 20th century as Jefferson's Literary Commonplace Book. During his years of legal study under Wythe, Jefferson began recording his notes on law, history, and philosophy, and continued to do so until the end of his life. His Legal Commonplace Book was also published in the 20th century. On July 20th, 1765, Jefferson's sister Martha married his close friend and college companion Dabney Carr, which greatly pleased Jefferson. In October of that year, however, Jefferson mourned his sister Jane's unexpected death at age 25. Jefferson treasured his books and amassed 3 sizable libraries in his lifetime. He began assembling his first library, which grew to 200 volumes, in his youth. Wythe was so impressed with Jefferson that he later bequeathed his entire library to him. In 1770, however, Jefferson's first library was destroyed in a fire at his Shadwell home. Career, lawyer, and House of Burgesses. In 1767, Jefferson was granted admission to the Virginia bar and lived with his mother at Shadwell between 1769 and 1775. He represented Albemarle County in Virginia's House of Burgesses. While serving in the House of Burgesses, Jefferson pursued reforms to slavery, including writing and sponsoring legislation in 1769 to strip power from the royal governor and courts, instead providing masters of slaves with the discretion to emancipate them. Jefferson persuaded his cousin Richard Bland to spearhead the legislation's passage, but it faced strong opposition in a state whose economy was largely agrarian. As a lawyer, Jefferson took on 7 freedom-seeking enslaved people as clients and waived his fee for one he claimed should be freed before the minimum statutory age for emancipation. Jefferson invoked natural law, arguing everyone comes into the world with a right to his own person and using it at his own will. This is what is called personal liberty, and is given him by the author of nature, because it is necessary for his own sustenance. The judge cut him off and ruled against his client. As a consolation, Jefferson gave his client some money. which was conceivably used to aid his escape shortly thereafter. Jefferson's underlying intellectual argument that all people were entitled by their creator to what he labeled a natural right to liberty is a theme that he later prominently incorporated into the Declaration of Independence. In 1767, Jefferson took on 68 cases for the General Court of Virginia and was counsel in 3 notable cases of that era: Howell v. Netherland, 1770, Bowling v. Bowling, 1771, and Blair v. Blair, 1772. In 1774, Jefferson authored a resolution calling for a boycott of all British goods in protest of the British Parliament's passing of the Intolerable Acts. Jefferson's resolution was later expanded into a summary view of the rights of British America, published that year, in which he argued that people have the right to govern themselves. Monticello, Marriage and Family. In 1768, Jefferson began constructing his primary residence, Monticello, near present-day Charlottesville, Virginia. Its Italian name means Little Mountain in English. On January 1, 1772, Jefferson married his third cousin, Martha Wales Skelton, a 23-year-old widow of Bathurst Skelton. She was a frequent hostess for Jefferson and managed a large household. Historian Dumas Malone described the marriage as the happiest period of Jefferson's life. Martha was a skilled pianist. Jefferson often accompanied her on the violin or cello. During their 10-year marriage, Martha bore 6 children: Martha Patsy, 1772 to 1836, Jane Randolph, 1774-1775, an unnamed son who lived for only a few weeks in 1777, Mary Polly, 1778 to 1804, Lucy Elizabeth, 1782-1781, and another Lucy Elizabeth, 1782 to 1784. Only Martha and Mary survived to adulthood. Martha's father, John Wales, died in 1773, and the couple inherited 135 enslaved people. Onzi acres 45 km, 17 square miles, and the estate's debts. The debts took Jefferson years to satisfy, contributing to his financial problems. Martha later suffered from ill health, including diabetes, and frequent childbirth weakened her. A few months after the birth of her last child, she died on September 6, 1782, with Jefferson at her bedside. Shortly before her death, Martha made Jefferson promise never to marry again, telling him that she could not bear to have another mother raise her children. Jefferson was grief-stricken by her death, relentlessly pacing back and forth for roughly 3 weeks, and finally emerging to take long rambling rides on secluded roads with his daughter, Martha, who said she was a solitary witness to many a violent burst of grief. Revolutionary War Declaration of Independence. Jefferson was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. At age 33, he was one of the youngest delegates to the Second Continental Congress, which convened in the colonial capital of Philadelphia following the battles of Lexington and Concord, which launched the American Revolutionary War in 1775. Delegates to the Congress overwhelmingly favored authoring, ratifying, and issuing a formal Declaration of Independence from Britain. Jefferson was inspired by the Enlightenment ideals of the sanctity of the individual and the writings of Locke and Montesquieu. Jefferson sought out John Adams, a Continental Congress delegate from Massachusetts and an emerging leader in the Congress. They became close friends, and Adams supported Jefferson's appointment to the Committee of Five, which the Congress charged with authoring the Declaration. Adams, Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Robert R. Livingston, and Roger Sherman. The committee initially thought that Adams should write the document, but Adams persuaded the committee to choose Jefferson due to Jefferson being a Virginian, popular, and a good writer by Adams. Jefferson consulted with his fellow committee members, but mostly wrote the Declaration of Independence in isolation. Between June 11th and 28th, 1776, Jefferson drew considerably on his proposed draft of the Virginia Constitution, George Mason's draft of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, and other sources. Other committee members made some changes, and a final draft was presented to Congress on June 28, 1776. Congress began debate over its contents on Monday, July 1, resulting in the removal of roughly a fourth of Jefferson's original draft. Jefferson resented the changes, but he did not speak publicly about them. On July 4, 1776, the Congress voted unanimously to ratify the Declaration, and delegates signed it on August 2nd. Jefferson and the other delegates knew they were committing high treason against the Crown, which was punishable by torture and death. Following its ratification, the Declaration was released publicly. 2 days after its ratification, on July 6th, the Pennsylvania Evening Post was the first newspaper to publish it. On July 8th at noon, it was read publicly and simultaneously for the first time at 3 designated locations: Trenton, New Jersey, Easton, Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia. Contemporary historians generally view the Declaration of Independence as one of the most significant and influential written documents in world history, and Jefferson's preamble is regarded as an enduring statement on individual and human rights. Jefferson's phrase, "All men are created equal," has been called one of the best-known sentences in the English language. Harvard University history chairman David Armitage has written that no American document has had a greater global impact than the Declaration of Independence. And historian Joseph Ellis has written that the Declaration includes the most potent and consequential words in American history. Virginia state legislator and governor at the start of the American Revolution, Colonel Jefferson was named commander of the Albemarle County Militia on September 26, 1775. He was then elected to the Virginia House of Delegates for Albemarle County in September 1776, when finalizing the state constitution was a priority. For nearly 3 years, Jefferson assisted with the Constitution and was especially proud of his bill for establishing religious freedom, which prohibited state support of religious institutions or enforcement of religious doctrine. The bill failed to pass, as did his legislation to disestablish the Anglican Church, but both were later revived by James Madison. In 1778, Jefferson was given the task of revising the state's laws. He drafted 126 bills in 3 years, including laws to streamline the judicial system. He proposed statutes that provided for general education, which he considered the basis of Republican government. Jefferson also was concerned that Virginia's powerful landed gentry were becoming a hereditary aristocracy and took the lead in abolishing what he called feudal and unnatural distinctions. He targeted laws such as entail and primogeniture, by which a deceased landowner's oldest son was vested with all land ownership and power. Jefferson was elected governor for 1-year terms in 1779 and 1780. He transferred the state capital from Williamsburg to Richmond and introduced additional measures for public education, religious freedom, and inheritance. During General Benedict Arnold's 1781 invasion of Virginia, Jefferson escaped Richmond just ahead of the British forces, which razed the city. He sent emergency dispatches to Colonel Sampson Matthews and other commanders in an attempt to repel Arnold's efforts. General Charles Cornwallis, that spring, dispatched a cavalry force led by Banastre Tarleton to capture Jefferson and members of the Assembly at Monticello. But Jack Jowett of the Virginia militia thwarted the British plan. Jefferson escaped to Poplar Forest, his plantation to the west. When the General Assembly reconvened in June 1781, it conducted an inquiry into Jefferson's actions, which eventually concluded that Jefferson had acted with honor, but Jefferson was not re-elected. In April of the same year, his daughter Lucy died at age 1. A second daughter of that name was born the following year, but she died at age 2. In 1782, Jefferson refused a partnership offer by North Carolina Governor Abner Nash in a profiteering scheme involving the sale of confiscated Loyalist lands. Unlike some founders, Jefferson was content with his Monticello estate and the land he owned in the vicinity of Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. Jefferson thought of Monticello as an intellectual gathering place for James Madison, James Monroe, and other friends. Member of Congress, Jefferson was appointed a Virginia delegate to the Congress of the Confederation, organized following the peace treaty with Great Britain in 1783. He was a member of the committee setting foreign exchange rates and recommended an American currency based on the decimal system that was adopted. He advised the formation of the Committee of the States, to fill the power vacuum. When Congress was in recess, the committee met when Congress adjourned, but disagreements rendered it dysfunctional. Jefferson sent a letter revealed in 2025 to Virginia Governor Benjamin Harrison, dated December 31, 1783, in which he relates the wave of enthusiasm of Europeans for taking up arms against their leaders. Jefferson was sharing the affirmation of his own promotion of the right to bear arms that brought about the American Revolution. The letter also conveys Jefferson's anxiety over the final ratification of the Treaty of Paris, formally ending the Revolutionary War. Signed initially by the parties in September, the still outstanding consent of 2 colonies was required. In London, then a 2-month journey. By the following March, the deadline was ultimately but barely met, with the required signatures made in mid-January in the Congress's 1783 to 1784 session. Jefferson acted as chairman of committees to establish a viable system of government for the new republic and to propose a policy for settlement of the Western territories. He was the principal author of the Land Ordinance of 1784, whereby Virginia ceded to the national government the vast area that it claimed northwest of the Ohio River. He insisted that this territory should not be used as colonial territory by any of the 13 states, but that it should be divided into sections that could become states. He plotted borders for 9 new states in their initial stages and wrote an ordinance banning slavery in all the nation's territories. The provisions banning slavery, known as the Jefferson Proviso, were modified and implemented 3 years later in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 and became the law for the entire Northwest Territory. Minister to France, on May 7, 1784, Jefferson was appointed by the Congress of the Confederation to join Benjamin Franklin and John Adams in Paris as minister plenipotentiary for negotiating treaties of amity and commerce with Great Britain and other countries. 110J, with his young daughter Patsy and 2 servants, he departed in July 1784, arriving in Paris the next month. Jefferson had Patsy educated at Pentamont Abbey. Less than a year later, he was assigned the additional duty of succeeding Franklin as minister to France. French Foreign Minister Count de Vergennes commented, "You replace Monsieur Franklin, I hear." Jefferson replied, "I succeed. No man can replace him." During his 5 years in Paris, Jefferson played a leading role in shaping U.S. foreign policy. In 1786, he met and fell in love with Maria Causeway, a married 27-year-old Italian-English musician. She returned to Great Britain after 6 weeks, but she and Jefferson maintained a lifelong correspondence. During the summer of 1786, Jefferson arrived in London to meet with John Adams, who was then serving as the nation's first U.S. ambassador to Britain. Adams had official access to George III and arranged a meeting between Jefferson and the king. Jefferson later described the king's reception of the men as ungracious. According to Adams's grandson, George III turned his back on both in a gesture of public insult. Jefferson returned to France in August. Jefferson sent for his youngest surviving child, 9-year-old Polly, in June 1787. She was accompanied by a young slave from Monticello, Sally Hemings. Jefferson had taken her older brother, James Hemings, to Paris as part of his domestic staff and had him trained in French cuisine. 118. According to Sally's son, Madison Hemings, 16-year-old Sally and Jefferson began a sexual relationship in Paris, where she became pregnant. 119. The son indicated Hemings agreed to return to the United States only after Jefferson promised to free her children when they came of age. While in France, Jefferson became a regular companion of the Marquis de Lafayette, a French hero of the American Revolution, and Jefferson used his influence with Lafayette to procure trade agreements with France. As the French Revolution began, Jefferson agreed to allow his Paris residence at Hôtel de Languique to be used for meetings by Lafayette and other Republicans. He was in Paris during the storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, and he consulted with Lafayette as Lafayette drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Jefferson often found his mail opened by postmasters, so he invented his own enciphering device, the wheel cipher. He wrote important communications in code for the rest of his career. Unable to attend the 1787 Constitution Convention, Jefferson supported the Constitution but desired the addition of the promised Bill of Rights. Secretary of State soon after returning from France, Jefferson accepted President Washington's invitation to serve as Secretary of State. Pressing issues at the time, the national debt and where the new national capital should be placed following its planned relocation from Philadelphia in 1800, placed him at odds with Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton, who favored a capital close to major commercial centers in the Northeast, while Washington, Jefferson, and other agrarians wanted it further south. After a lengthy deadlock, the Compromise of 1790 was struck, permanently locating the capital on the Potomac River, and the federal government assumed the war debts of all original 13 states. Jefferson opposed a national debt, preferring that each state retire its own, which contrasted with Hamilton's vision of the federal government consolidating state debts and establishing national credit and a national bank. Jefferson strenuously opposed both policies and attempted to undermine Hamilton's agenda, which nearly led Washington to dismiss him from the cabinet. He later left the cabinet voluntarily. Jefferson's goals were to decrease American dependence on British commerce and to expand commercial trade with France. He sought to weaken Spanish colonialism of the Trans-Appalachia and British control in the North, believing this would aid in the pacification of Native Americans. Along with political James Madison, then a U.S. representative, and author Philip Freneau, Jefferson co-founded the National Gazette in Philadelphia in 1791, which sought to counter the policies of the Federalist Party, which Hamilton was promoting through the Gazette of the United States, an influential Federalist newspaper. The National Gazette criticized the policies promoted by Hamilton, often in anonymous essays signed by the pen name Brutus at Jefferson's urging and written by Madison. In spring 1791, Jefferson was suffering from migraines and tiring of the infighting with Hamilton, and he and Madison departed for a vacation in Vermont. In May 1792, Jefferson's concern about emerging political rivalries in the young nation was escalating, and he wrote Washington, imploring him to run for re-election for a second term that year as a unifying influence. He urged the president to rally the citizenry to a party that would defend democracy against the corrupting influence of banks and financial-focused interests, which the Federalists were embracing and espousing. Historians recognize Jefferson's letter to Washington as one of the first delineations of Democratic-Republican Party principles. Jefferson, Madison, and other Democratic-Republican organizers favored states' rights and local control and opposed the federal concentration of power. Hamilton, conversely, sought more power vested in the federal government. Jefferson supported France against Britain when the two nations fought in 1793. Though his arguments in Washington's cabinet were undercut by French Revolutionary envoy Edmund Charles Janet's open scorn for Washington and discussions with British Minister George Hammond, Jefferson tried in vain to persuade the British to vacate their posts in the Northwest and to compensate the U.S. for enslaved people freed by the British at the end of the Revolutionary War. Jefferson also sought to return to private life and resigned from the cabinet in December 1793. He may also have wanted to bolster his political influence from outside the administration. After the Washington administration negotiated the Jay Treaty with Britain in 1794, Jefferson saw a cause around which he could rally the Democratic-Republican Party. He organized national opposition to the treaty from Monticello, 139. The treaty, designed by Hamilton, aimed to reduce tensions and increase trade. Jefferson warned that it would increase British influence and subvert republicanism, calling it the boldest act Hamilton and Jay ever ventured on to undermine the government. 140, the treaty passed, but it expired in 1805 during Jefferson's presidential administration, and then President Jefferson did not renew it. Jefferson continued his pro-France stance. During the violence of the Reign of Terror, he declined to disavow the revolution. To back away from France would be to undermine the cause of republicanism in America, he wrote. Election of 1796, and vice presidency in the presidential campaign of 1796. Jefferson lost the Electoral College vote to Federalist John Adams, 71 to 68. He did, however, receive the second highest number of votes, and under the electoral laws at the time, was elected as vice president. As presiding officer of the United States Senate, Jefferson assumed a more passive role than his predecessor, John Adams. He allowed the Senate to freely conduct debates and confined his participation to procedural issues, which he called an honorable and easy role. Jefferson previously studied parliamentary law and procedure for 40 years, making him qualified to serve as presiding officer. In 1800, he published his assembled notes on Senate procedure as a manual of parliamentary practice. He cast only 3 tie-breaking votes in the Senate, in 4 confidential talks with French consul Joseph in the spring of 1797. Jefferson attacked Adams, predicting that his rival would only serve 1 term. He also encouraged France to invade England and advised to stall any American envoys sent to Paris. This toughened the tone that the French government adopted toward the Adams administration. After Adams's initial peace envoys were rebuffed, Jefferson and his supporters lobbied for the release of papers related to the incident, called the XYZ affair, after the letters used to disguise the identities of the French officials involved. But the tactic backfired. When it was revealed that French officials had demanded bribes, rallying public support against France, the U.S. began an undeclared naval war with France, known as the Quasi-War. During the Adams presidency, the Federalists rebuilt the military, levied new taxes, and enacted the Alien and Sedition Acts. Jefferson believed these laws were intended to suppress Democratic Republicans, rather than prosecute enemy aliens, and considered them unconstitutional. To rally opposition, he and James Madison anonymously wrote the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, asserting that the federal government had no right to exercise powers not specifically delegated to it by the states. The resolutions followed the interposition approach of Madison, that states may shield their citizens from federal laws that they deem unconstitutional. Jefferson advocated nullification, allowing states to entirely invalidate federal laws. He warned that, unless arrested at the threshold, the Alien and Sedition Acts would drive these states into revolution and blood. Biographer Ron Chernow contends that the theoretical damage of the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions was deep and lasting, and was a recipe for disunion, and contributed to the outbreak of the American Civil War and later events. Washington was so appalled by the resolutions that he told Patrick Henry that if systematically and pertinaciously pursued, the resolutions would dissolve the Union or produce coercion. Jefferson had always admired Washington's leadership skills, but felt that his Federalist Party was leading the country in the wrong direction. He decided not to attend Washington's funeral in 1799 because of acute differences with him while serving as Secretary of State. Election of 1800, Jefferson ran for president against John Adams again in 1800. Adams' campaign was weakened by unpopular taxes and vicious Federalist infighting over his actions in the Quasi-War. Democratic Republicans pointed to the Alien and Sedition Acts and accused the Federalists of being secret pro-Britain monarchists. Federalists, in turn, charged that Jefferson was a godless libertine beholden to the French. UCLA history professor Joyce Appleby described the 1800 presidential election as one of the most acrimonious in the annals of American history. The Democratic Republicans ultimately won more electoral college votes, due in part to the electors that resulted from the addition of 3/5 of the South's slaves to the population calculation under the 3/5 Compromise. Jefferson and his vice presidential candidate Aaron Burr unexpectedly received an equal total. Because of the tie, the election was decided by the Federalist-dominated U.S. House of Representatives. Hamilton lobbied Federalist representatives on Jefferson's behalf, believing him a lesser political evil than Burr. On February 17, 1801, after 36 ballots, the House elected Jefferson president and Burr vice president. The win led to Democratic-Republican celebrations throughout the country. Some of Jefferson's opponents argued that he owed his victory to the South's inflated number of electors. Others alleged that Jefferson secured James Ashton Bayard's tie-breaking electoral vote by promising to retain various Federalist posts in the government. Jefferson disputed the allegation, and the historical record is inconclusive. The transition proceeded smoothly, marking a watershed in American history. Historian Gordon S. Wood writes that it was one of the first popular elections in modern history that resulted in the peaceful transfer of power from one party to another. Presidency 1801-1809. Jefferson was sworn in as president by Chief Justice John Marshall at the new Capitol in Washington, D.C. on March 4, 1801. His inauguration was not attended by outgoing President Adams. In contrast to his two predecessors, Jefferson exhibited a dislike of formal etiquette. Plainly dressed, he chose to walk alongside friends to the Capitol from his nearby boarding house. Instead of arriving by carriage, his inaugural address struck a note of reconciliation and commitment to democratic ideology, declaring, "We have been called by different names, brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists." Ideologically, he stressed equal and exact justice to all men, minority rights, and freedom of speech, religion, and press. He said that a free and Republican government was the strongest government on earth. He nominated moderate Republicans to his cabinet: James Madison as Secretary of State, Henry Dearborn as Secretary of War, Levi Lincoln as Attorney General, and Robert Smith as Secretary of the Navy. Widowed since 1782, Jefferson first relied on his two daughters to serve as his official hostesses. In late May 1801, he asked Dolly Madison, wife of his longtime friend James Madison, to be the permanent White House hostess. She was also in charge of the completion of the White House mansion. Dolly served as White House hostess for the rest of Jefferson's terms and then for another 8 years as First Lady while her husband was president. Financial affairs. Jefferson's first challenge as president was shrinking the $83 million national debt. He began dismantling Hamilton's Federalist fiscal system with help from the Secretary of the Treasury, Albert Gallatin. Gallatin devised a plan to eliminate the national debt in 16 years by extensive annual appropriations and reduction in taxes. The administration eliminated the whiskey excise and other taxes after closing unnecessary offices and cutting useless establishments and expenses. Jefferson believed that the First Bank of the United States represented a most deadly hostility to Republican government. He wanted to dismantle the bank before its charter expired in 1811, but was dissuaded by Gallatin. Argued that the National Bank was a useful financial institution and set out to expand its operations. Jefferson looked to other corners to address the growing national debt. He shrank the Navy, for example, deeming it unnecessary in peacetime, and incorporated a fleet of inexpensive gunboats intended only for local defense to avoid provocation against foreign powers. After 2 terms, he had lowered the national debt from $83 million to $57 million. Domestic affairs. Jefferson pardoned several of those imprisoned under the Alien and Sedition Acts. Congressional. Republicans repealed the Judiciary Act of 1801, which removed nearly all of Adams's midnight judges. A subsequent appointment battle led to the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Marbury v. Madison, asserting judicial review over executive branch actions. 177. Jefferson appointed 3 Supreme Court justices: William Johnson 1804, Henry Brockholst Livingston 1807, and Thomas Todd 1807. Jefferson strongly felt the need for a national military university, producing an officer engineering corps for a national defense based on the advancement of the sciences, rather than having to rely on foreign sources. He signed the Military Peace Establishment Act on March 16, 1802, founding the United States Military Academy at West Point. The act documented a new set of laws and limits for the military. Jefferson was also hoping to bring reform to the executive branch, replacing Federalists and active opponents throughout the officer corps to promote Republican values. Jefferson took great interest in the Library of Congress, which had been established in 1800. He often recommended books to acquire. In 1802, Congress authorized Jefferson to name the first librarian of Congress. and formed a committee to establish library regulations. Congress also granted both the President and Vice President the right to use the library. Foreign Affairs 1801-1805. First Barbary War, American. Merchant ships had been protected from Barbary coast pirates by the Royal Navy when the states were British colonies. After independence, however, pirates often captured U.S. merchant ships, pillaged cargoes, and enslaved or held crew members for ransom. Jefferson had opposed paying tribute to the Barbary states since 1785. In 1801, he authorized a U.S. Navy fleet under Commodore Richard Dale to make a show of force in the Mediterranean, the first American naval squadron to cross the Atlantic. Following the fleet's first engagement, he successfully asked Congress for a declaration of war. 183. The First Barbary War was the first foreign war fought by the U.S. Pasha of Tripoli, Yusuf Karamanli, captured the USS Philadelphia, so Jefferson authorized William Eaton, the U.S. consul to Tunis, to lead a force to restore the Pasha's older brother to the throne. The American Navy forced Tunis and Algiers into breaking their alliance with Tripoli. Jefferson ordered 5 separate naval bombardments of Tripoli, leading the Pasha to sign a treaty that restored peace in the Mediterranean. This victory proved only temporary, but according to Wood, many Americans celebrated it as a vindication of their policy of spreading free trade around the world and as a great victory for liberty over tyranny. Louisiana Purchase. Spain ceded ownership of the Louisiana Territory in 1800 to France. Jefferson was concerned that Napoleon's interests in the vast territory would threaten the security of the continent and Mississippi River shipping. He wrote that the cession works most sorely on the U.S. It completely reverses all the political relations of the U.S. In 1802, he instructed James Monroe and Robert R. Livingston to negotiate the purchase of New Orleans and adjacent coastal areas. Napoleon realized that French military control was impractical over such a vast remote territory, and he was in dire need of funds for his wars on the home front. In early April 1803, he unexpectedly made negotiators a counteroffer to sell 827,987 square miles, 2,144,480 square kilometers of French territory for $15 million, $371 million, $371 million in 2023, doubling the size of the United States. 190 U.S. negotiators accepted the offer and signed the treaty on April 30, 1803. Word of the unexpected purchase did not reach Jefferson until July 3, 1803. He unknowingly acquired the most fertile tract of land of its size on Earth, making the new country self-sufficient in food and other resources. The sale also significantly curtailed European presence in North America, removing obstacles to U.S. westward expansion. Most thought that this was an exceptional opportunity, despite Republican reservations about the constitutional authority of the federal government to acquire land. Jefferson initially thought that a constitutional amendment was necessary to purchase and govern the new territory, but he later changed his mind, fearing that this would give cause to oppose the purchase, and urged a speedy debate and ratification. After the purchase, Jefferson preserved the region's Spanish legal code and instituted a gradual approach to integrating settlers into American democracy. He believed that a period of the federal rule would be necessary, while Louisianans adjusted to their new nation. Historians have differed in their assessments regarding the constitutional implications of the sale, but they typically hail the Louisiana acquisition as a major accomplishment. Frederick Jackson Turner called the purchase the most formative event in American history. Expeditions. Jefferson anticipated further westward settlements due to the Louisiana purchase and arranged for the exploration and mapping of the uncharted territory. He sought to establish a U.S. claim ahead of competing European interests and to find the rumored Northwest Passage. Jefferson and others were influenced by exploration accounts of LePage du Prat's in Louisiana 1763 and James Cook in the Pacific 1784, and they persuaded Congress in 1804 to fund an expedition to explore and map the newly acquired territory to the Pacific Ocean. Jefferson appointed Secretary Meriwether Lewis and acquaintance William Clark to lead the Corps of Discovery, 1803 to 1806. In the months leading up to the expedition, Jefferson tutored Lewis in the sciences of mapping, botany, natural history, mineralogy, and astronomy and navigation, giving him unlimited access to his library at Monticello, which included the largest collection of books in the world on the subject of the geography and natural history of the North American continent. Along with an impressive collection of maps, the expedition lasted from May 1804 to September 1806 and obtained a wealth of scientific and geographic knowledge, including knowledge of many Indian tribes. Jefferson organized 3 other Western expeditions: the William Dunbar and George Hunter expedition on the Washita River, 1804-1805, the Thomas Freeman and Peter Custis expedition, 1806, on the Red River, and the Zebulon Pike expedition, 1806-1807, into the Rocky Mountains in the Southwest. All 3 produced valuable information about the American frontier. This interest also motivated Jefferson to meet the Prussian explorer Alexander von Humboldt several times in June 1804, inquiring into Humboldt's knowledge of New Spain's natural resources, economic prospects, and demographic development. Native American affairs. Jefferson refuted the contemporary notion that Indians were inferior and maintained that they were equal in body and mind to people of European descent. 207, although he believed them to be inferior in terms of culture and technology. 208, as governor of Virginia during the Revolutionary War, Jefferson recommended moving the Cherokee and Shawnee tribes, who had allied with the British, to west of the Mississippi River. But when he took office as president, he quickly took measures to avert another major conflict. As American and Indian societies were in collision and the British were inciting Indian tribes from Canada, in Georgia, he stipulated that the state would release its legal claims for lands to its west in exchange for military support in expelling the Cherokee from Georgia. This facilitated his policy of western expansion to advance compactly as we multiply. In keeping with his Enlightenment thinking, President Jefferson adopted an assimilation policy toward American Indians known as his Civilization Program, which included securing peaceful U.S.-Indian treaty alliances and encouraging agriculture. Jefferson advocated that Indian tribes should make federal purchases by credit holding their lands as collateral. Various tribes accepted Jefferson's policies, including the Shawnees, led by Black Hoof, the Muskogee, and the Cherokee. However, some Shawnees, led by Tecumseh, broke off from Black Hoof and opposed Jefferson's assimilation policies. Historian Bernard Sheehan argues that Jefferson believed that assimilation was best for American Indians, and next best was removal to the West. He felt that the worst outcome of the conflict would be their attacking the whites. Jefferson told U.S. Secretary of War Henry Dearborn, who then oversaw Indian affairs, "If we are constrained to lift the hatchet against any tribe, we will never lay it down until that tribe is exterminated or driven beyond the Mississippi." Miller agrees that Jefferson believed that Indians should assimilate to American customs and agriculture. Historians, such as Peter S. Onoff and Merrill D. Peterson, argued that Jefferson's actual Indian policies did little to promote assimilation and were a pretext to seize lands. Re-election in 1804 and second term. Jefferson was nominated for re-election by the Democratic-Republican Party, with George Clinton replacing Burr as his running mate. The Federalist Party ran Charles Cotesworth Pinckney of South Carolina, John Adams's vice presidential candidate in the 1800 election. The Jefferson-Clinton ticket won overwhelmingly in the Electoral College vote by 162 to 14, promoting their achievement of a strong economy, lower taxes, and the Louisiana Purchase. In March 1806, a split developed in the Democratic-Republican Party, led by fellow Virginian and former Republican ally John Randolph, who viciously accused President Jefferson on the floor of the House of moving too far in the Federalist direction, permanently setting Randolph apart politically from Jefferson. Jefferson and Madison backed resolutions to limit or ban British imports in retaliation for British seizures of American shipping. Also, in 1808, Jefferson was the first president to propose a broad federal plan to build roads and canals across several states, asking for $20 million, further alarming Randolph and believers of limited government. Jefferson's popularity suffered further in his second term as a result of his response to wars in Europe. Relations with Britain deteriorated, due partly to the antipathy between Jefferson and British diplomat Anthony Merry. After Napoleon's decisive victory at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, Napoleon became more aggressive in his negotiations with Jefferson and the U.S. over trading rights, which the U.S. proved unsuccessful in countering. Jefferson then led the enactment of the Embargo Act of 1807, directed at both France and Britain, which triggered economic chaos in the U.S. and was strongly criticized, leading Jefferson to abandon the policy a year later. During the American Revolution, colonial states abolished the international slave trade, but South Carolina reopened it. In his annual message of December 1806, Jefferson denounced the international slave trade as violations of human rights and called on the new Congress to immediately criminalize it. The following year, in 1807, Congress passed the Act prohibiting importation of slaves, which Jefferson signed. The act established severe punishment against the international slave trade, although it did not address the issue domestically. In Haiti, Jefferson's neutrality allowed arms to flow to the slave independence movement during the Haitian Revolution, and Jefferson blocked attempts to assist Napoleon, who was defeated militarily in Haiti in 1803. But Jefferson's administration refused official recognition of Haiti during his second term. In deference to Southern complaints about racial violence against slaveholders, recognition was not extended to Haiti until 1862. Controversies following the 1801 electoral deadlock. Jefferson's relationship with his vice president, Aaron Burr, rapidly eroded. Jefferson suspected Burr of seeking the presidency for himself. While Burr was angered by Jefferson's refusal to appoint some of his supporters to federal office, Burr was dropped from the Democratic-Republican ticket in 1804 in favor of charismatic George Clinton. The same year, Burr was soundly defeated in his bid to be elected New York governor. During the campaign, Alexander Hamilton made publicly callous remarks regarding Burr's moral character. Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel, held on July 11, 1804. In the duel, Burr mortally wounded Hamilton, who died the following day. Burr was subsequently indicted for Hamilton's murder, causing him to flee to Georgia. Even though he remained president of the U.S. Senate during Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase's impeachment trial, both indictments quietly died, and Burr was not prosecuted. In August 1804, Burr contacted British Minister Anthony Merry, offering to cede U.S. Western Territory in return for money and British ships. After leaving office in April 1805, Burr traveled west and conspired with Louisiana Territory Governor James Wilkinson, beginning a large-scale recruitment for a military expedition. Burr discussed seizing control of Mexico or Spanish Florida, or forming a secessionist state in New Orleans or the western U.S. Historians remain unclear as to his true goal. In the fall of 1806, Burr launched a military flotilla carrying about 60 men down the Ohio River. Wilkinson renounced the plot and reported Burr's expedition to Jefferson, who ordered Burr's arrest. On February 13, 1807, Burr was captured in Louisiana and sent to Virginia to be tried for treason. Burr's 1807 conspiracy trial became a national issue. Jefferson attempted to preemptively influence the verdict by telling Congress that Burr's guilt was beyond question. But the case came before his longtime political foe and distant cousin, John Marshall, who dismissed the treason charge. Burr's legal team subpoenaed Jefferson, but Jefferson refused to testify, making the first argument for executive privilege. Instead, Jefferson provided relevant legal documents. After a 3-month trial, the jury found Burr not guilty, while Jefferson denounced his acquittal. Jefferson subsequently removed Wilkinson as territorial governor, but retained him in the U.S. military. Historian James N. Banner criticized Jefferson for continuing to trust Wilkinson, a faithless plotter. Foreign Affairs, 1805 to 1809, attempted annexation of Florida in the aftermath of the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson attempted to annex West Florida from Spain. In his annual message to Congress on December 3, 1805, Jefferson railed against Spain over Florida border depredations. A few days later, Jefferson secretly requested a $2 million expenditure to purchase Florida. Floor leader John Randolph opposed annexation, was upset over Jefferson's secrecy on the matter, and believed that the money would end up going to Napoleon. The $2 million bill passed only after Jefferson successfully maneuvered to replace Randolph with Barnabas Bidwell as floor leader. This aroused suspicion of Jefferson and charges of undue executive influence over Congress. Jefferson signed the bill into law in February 1806. 6 weeks later, the law was made public. The $2 million was to be given to France as payment, in turn, to put pressure on Spain to permit the annexation of Florida by the United States. France, however, refused the offer, and Florida remained under Spanish control. The failed venture damaged Jefferson's reputation among his supporters. Chesapeake Leopard affair. Starting in 1806, the Royal Navy began stopping American merchantmen to search for deserters from the British Navy. Approximately 6,000 sailors were impressed into the Royal Navy, this way leading to deep anger and resentment among the U.S. public. In 1806, Jefferson issued a call for a boycott of British goods. On April 18th, Congress passed the Non-Importation Acts, but they were never enforced. Later that year, Jefferson asked James Monroe and William Pinckney to negotiate an end to foreign interference with American merchant shipping. Though relations with Britain showed no signs of improving, the Monroe-Pinckney Treaty was finalized but lacked any provisions regarding the issue of impressment, and Jefferson refused to submit it to the Senate for ratification. The British warship HMS Leopard encountered the USS Chesapeake off the Virginia coast in June 1807. Leopard fired at Chesapeake after the latter refused to allow for a search for deserters before removing 4 deserters from the ship. Jefferson issued a proclamation banning British warships from U.S. waters. He presumed unilateral authority to call on the states to prepare 100,000 militia and ordered the purchase of arms, ammunition, and supplies, writing, "The laws of necessity, of self-preservation, of saving our country when in danger, are of higher obligation than strict observance of written laws." The USS Revenge was dispatched to demand an explanation from the British government, and Jefferson called for a special session of Congress in October to enact an embargo, or alternatively, to consider war. Embargo 1807-1809. In December 1807, news arrived that Napoleon had extended the Berlin Decree, globally banning British imports. The Royal Navy, meanwhile, continued to impress sailors from American merchant ships. However, Congress had no appetite to prepare the U.S. for war. Jefferson asked for and received the Embargo Act, an alternative that allowed the U.S. more time to build up defensive works, militias, and naval forces. Meacham argued that the Embargo Act was a projection of power that surpassed the Alien and Sedition Acts, and R.B. Bernstein said that Jefferson was pursuing policies resembling those he had cited in 1776 as grounds for independence and revolution. In November 1807, Jefferson, for several days, met with his cabinet to discuss the deteriorating foreign situation. 250 Secretary of State James Madison supported the embargo, while Treasury Secretary Gallatin opposed it due to its indefinite time frame and the risk to the policy of American neutrality. The U.S. economy suffered, criticism grew, and opponents began evading the embargo. Instead of retreating, Jefferson sent federal agents to secretly track down smugglers and violators. 3 acts were passed in Congress during 1807 and 1808, called the Supplementary, the Additional, and the Enforcement Acts. The government could not prevent American vessels from trading with the European belligerents once they had left American ports, although the embargo triggered a devastating decline in exports. In December 1807, Jefferson announced his intention not to seek a third term. He turned his attention increasingly to Monticello during the last year of his presidency, giving Madison and Gallatin almost total control of affairs. Shortly before leaving office in March 1809, Jefferson signed the repeal of the embargo. The day before Madison was inaugurated as his successor, Jefferson said that he felt like a prisoner, released from his chains. Final days, death, and burial. Jefferson's approximately $100,000 of debt weighed heavily on his mind in his final months, as it became increasingly clear that he would have little to leave to his heirs. In February 1826, he successfully applied to the General Assembly to hold a public lottery as a fundraiser. His health began to deteriorate in July 1825 due to a combination of rheumatism from arm and wrist injuries and intestinal and urinary disorders. By June 1826, he was confined to bed, 286 on July 3rd, overcome by fever. Jefferson declined an invitation to attend an anniversary celebration of the Declaration in Washington. During his last hours, he was accompanied by family members and friends. Jefferson died on July 4, 1826, at 12:50 p.m., at age 83, on the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. In the moments prior to his death, Jefferson instructed his treating physician, "No doctor, nothing more," refusing laudanum, but his final significant words were, "Is it the fourth, or this is the fourth?" 288. When John Adams died later that same day, his last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives," though Adams was unaware that Jefferson had died several hours before. The sitting president was Adams's son, John Quincy Adams, and he called the coincidence of their deaths on the nation's anniversary visible and palpable remarks of divine favor. Shortly after Jefferson died, attendants found a gold locket on a chain around his neck, containing a small faded blue ribbon around a lock of his wife, Martha's hair.